Okay, hello. We have some incredible people here to talk about our topic today, and we have a lot of actually topics within this topic. So I'm super excited. To be honest, I think I will be part of a blip of this, but everybody else here has much more of an experience than I do, just because of the differences. But we're gonna differences of folk and occult spaces. But we're gonna get into that in this right now. So let's go through each person. I would like you all to introduce yourselves, give your pronouns, and then give me a kind of just like a little quick tidbit of like who you are and your content and things of that sort, your practice. I'd like
Who
to
do you
go
want to go
first.
first? Well, I guess I'll go first and get it out of the way since I spoke first. But hi, my name is Ivy Corvus. I am the token chaos magician today. I really love that we're all coming together from very diverse magical backgrounds. So I'm an author. I make content on YouTube. And what else did you want me to say? Pronouns, she, her. What else is on the list? I make content and I write stuff. So that's me.
There we go.
Someone else can go.
I guess I'll go next. Hey everyone, my name is Maevius Lynn. I'm a practicing occultist and ceremonial magician. I'm a writer, artist, officially now an international lecturer. I also have a book coming out this spring. I'm also, in terms of the place I fall in the ceremonial magic umbrella, I am a Thelemite. And I approached Thelema as a living tradition, but also from a scholarly perspective. So the research is really important to me in my writings and in my YouTube channel. I've been initiated into the OTO, which is a paramasonic fraternity in Thelema, as well as Temple of the Silver Star. And I'm looking forward to being here with you all today.
All right, I'll jump in next. My name is Lauren. I use she, they pronouns. I am, practicing ceremonial magician, mostly in the Golden Dawn tradition. So I started out with taking my neophyte initiation in my first Golden Dawn patterned order in 2006, 2005. Yep. So it's been, I guess, 20 years now this December. Been in a
Woohoo!
number of different traditional Golden Dawn orders, and I'm a Thelemite now. So I'm an initiate of the OTO. I'm also a temple chief with Temple of the Silver Star. And I'm also a therapist in private practice in Raleigh, North Carolina. So definitely very inspired by Regarde and a lot of those types of writers. Yeah.
Hey everybody, my name is Astra. I'm a Solomonic ceremonial magician. Pronouns are she, her. Most of my practice focuses on the grimoire tradition, so that's mostly what you'll hear me talk about. Not just the Solomonic grimoires, but of course there's a much wider variety. I am an initiate into some groups that I am not able to name for you, but I'll be bringing that into this conversation as well. And then by day, I'm a scientist. So by day a scientist, by night an occultist. That's how it goes.
I love that combination so much. The whole conversation is basically just about women in the occult space and also just femi presenting people in the occult space, because if you're presented as femi, then you kind of get this treatment regardless, which is really unfortunate. So that, and like the amount of misogyny that you all get. I mean, like I get misogyny. I know that Annabelle gets misogyny, the Green Witch, for totally different reasons. And then you all, as occultists, kind of like a step away from folk practice, or not a step away, but a different practice of folk traditions, get a heavy handed amount of misogyny, especially in these particular spaces. And like online, we all know that people will say whatever the hell they want. So people say some really, not only just like rude, but sometimes very disgusting and disturbing things to us. And I think that people, women and femmies in the occult spaces and the ceremonial spaces, I think get a lot more of that, unfortunately, as I've seen in your comment sections. So yes. But anyway, the first thing is, I guess we have to kind of define what misogyny means, and also defining our different practices of like ceremonial, occult, folk, Solomonic, like chaos magic, just being able to define those so that our audience knows kind of like what we're talking about when we say those things. So I'll just kind of pop in and say that folk magic is the way that I best describe it is it's the magic for the general public. It's for the people. It's usually very localized. It's usually very community based, and it's usually very home based. So, you know, this is the classic stuff, finding shit in your kitchen or using a rock or things of that sort. And it does less to do with certain timings and rhythmic rituals and things of that sort. So that'll be my small introduction to folk magic. We'll go back in that same circle that we did. So we'll do Ivy next.
I was just going to ask. Yeah, I was just going to ask. So yeah, I guess I can define chaos magic really quick. Chaos magic isn't really a magical practice in its own right per se, because there's really no rules or limitations, and you can practice any form of magic from any tradition from a chaos magic perspective. So it's more of a philosophy, a perspective on how magic works, as well as a postmodern magical practice if you choose to interpret it that way. But it really centers around the idea of using your belief as a tool in your rituals. So if you believe that it is your belief that's powering something, you might be prescribing to a bit of chaos magic theory. But chaos magic theory itself encompasses many other things, of course, such as deconditioning the mind, paradigm jumping, also called belief shifting, you know, which is where you're intentionally discarding and adopting new beliefs, and that kind of works to decondition your mind as well. The avoidance of dogmatism and also gnosis, this perspective on personal gnosis and entering Gnostic states before ritual. So there's a lot more that goes into chaos magic. I think there's a misconception that it's seen as just silly and chaotic, which sometimes it can be. It can be really fun when you're invoking Pokemon in a ritual. I'm not saying that's something I personally do, because that's, you know, not for me. I have my own pop culture magic icons that I like to work with, but you know, I think it's seen as not very serious. And so I know from a ceremonial perspective, that's comments I receive quite a bit, where ceremonial magicians will kind of scoff at chaos magic, and that's okay, because sometimes chaos magic scoffs at ceremonial magic, and it's perfectly fine to agree to disagree. But yeah, so I guess that's my definition of chaos magic, and I can't wait to get into everything else that you said, Olivia, but I'll pass the torch.
All right, so I'm next in line. So, of course, being an individual out in the world, my practice isn't just defined by Thelema, but I am on these spaces on the internet talking about Thelema. So I'm going to define that for you all and what that means to me. So I consider myself a Thelemite, which is someone who practices Thelema. Thelema is an occult religion, philosophy, and system of mysticism established by Aleister Crowley as well as others. And it's part of this milieu of a new religious movement. So one of the core ideas in Thelema is, after we have Judaism, Christianity, Islam, and then an event called the Equinox of the Gods occurred. As a cosmic event, it has to do with the astrology, which I won't get into, but if you're interested, check out my book coming out in spring, if you want to go deep into this stuff. But that occurred, and Aleister Crowley and his wife, who was Rose, and she was not an occultist, they received a text called the Book of the Law, which started the central foundational work of what would become Thelema. And, Thelema, one thing people don't understand is it's not just some random stuff people put together in a big pot. It actually has these core holy texts, which sort of form the backbone of Thelema as an occult religion. What's great about being a Thelemite is you do have organizations like the AA, like the OTO, such as Temple of the Silver Star, as well as others, which you can join, initiate into, and part of the goal of that is getting to know thyself, right? Getting to strip back those layers, know yourself, so you can eventually arrive at a place to achieve something we refer to as knowledge and conversation of the holy guardian angel. And upon that sort of mystical marriage, you can continue your spiritual journey on the way of return. And that's essentially one of being reunited, right, with God, the unification of opposites. So it's a transformational process. And of course, there's a lot of practical things that come with it. It's not just these grand, beautiful rituals. You know, a lot of Thelemites are solo practitioners. So an important thing, one last thing I want to mention, I could talk forever about this, is that Thelema is an open practice. So for those who seek initiation, it's there for you. For those who prefer a more solo path, or people who want to dip and dabble, maybe try out a couple of our rituals, see how that feels, see how some of our more solar-centered magic feels, you're more than welcome to do that. I'm of the opinion, and I continue to be, that a little bit of magic in your day, a little bit of magic in your life is better than none. And so finding space for that, I think, is a beautiful thing. And I'm here really to empower people to explore, to play, and welcome you into the tradition of Thelema.
I'm gonna have to have you back on the channel because I'm just gonna pick your brain
Oh,
later about that.
I would love to. Especially,
Okay.
I gotta send you my book coming out this spring too.
Oh no, don't send me books.
You'd be cursed by receiving mail.
No. If you ship internationally, let me know.
I will for you.
Stop flirting with me. Okay. Anyway, Lauren.
Oh, am I up next? Okay. One of the things that's great is like Lynn has already explained Thelema so well. So I love that. So I'll speak
Please
a little bit more
add.
about the Golden Dawn tradition specifically. So um, there's many different Golden Dawn patterned orders, right? I mean, you've got the �12𝘶𝘵𝑑, run by the Ciceros. There's lots of small independent Golden Dawn temples, and Temple of the Silver Star is Golden Dawn pattern, which many people don't realize is basically a Golden Dawn patterned order. So what that means for people that aren't really familiar with it is um, it's very much kind of mystical in orientation to the extent that what you're doing is working through different levels of initiations, not so much to gain magical power, but more to kind of like get yourself, your body, your mind, your energetic vehicle, your spirit lined up in such a way that you'll be able to contain, channel, and work with that power later on. So it's very much transformative in nature. So you could call it much more kind of theurgical than thaumaturgical if you want to use that kind of language. So that's what's been most important to me. Also being pretty involved with AA, which is Aleister Crowley's sort of magical school that he started. Um, you're looking at not just the Western magical practices, but a lot of mystical practices and yoga, pranayama, meditation coming out of, everything from Eastern traditions. So it's really kind of a mix of different methods towards, spiritual attainment. And the key one is called Knowledge and Conversation of the Holy Guardian Angel. So there's a lot of roots in like traditional Western magical practices that have kind of evolved over the years to where it is now. And so, again, a lot of those are open. The specific ones for specific orders tend to be obligated. But if you, read any of the books about the Golden Dawn, you'll see a lot of the same patterns throughout Golden Dawn type orders.
Yeah, asking about the grimoire tradition is kind of hard to explain because it's such a broad category. The grimoire tradition goes all the way from 2nd century BCE with the Greek magical papyri, for example, all the way up even until modern day. There are currently modern grimoires that people often use, although I will say, classically speaking, the grimoire tradition is typically thought of from the 2nd century BCE all the way to sort of the late Renaissance period or the early modern period, so talking like upwards of the 17th, 18th century. Most of what I focus on are the medieval period up to the Renaissance period, so anywhere from like the 13th century to the 18th century. And during that time, really, the purpose of the grimoire tradition is more theurgic in nature, in the sense that we are trying to follow this Platonic ascent of the soul back up to the creator, the source, the one. And the way in which you do it is by interacting with these various spirits. If you take a Kabbalistic framework with that, then you're interacting with the Sephiroth. Alternatively, you might interact with the 4 altitudes found at the Almudel, for example. And there's many different variations of these depending upon the grimoire system that you wish to work. And many of them also incorporate magic from different sort of parts of the 3-world structure that is very common. It was influenced by Agrippa. This idea that you have spirits of the material world, and then you have spirits of the celestial, and you have spirits of the divine world. And working with all 3 of them can help you sort of perfect yourself and then also ascend until you have that unification with the one, the creator, often cited as God, especially in the Renaissance period. So that's really just a brief overview of the grimoire tradition. It gets very complicated with each individual grimoire, so it's sort of hard to summarize, but that gives you a general idea of what I'm talking about.
Let's define misogyny, right? And I mean, if we want to just like get straight textbook, misogyny is straight up defined as the hatred, the mistrust, and the prejudice against women. And, we see this against really any femme present people as well. But that shows up in spaces every day for women all the time, especially in the occult realm. There's a lot of different ways that this is going to like kind of pop in. And make itself known in the ways of essentially like, just because you are all women, that you are not good enough, or you are not ever going to be at this specific level that I think people set these like ridiculous expectations just because you're a woman, saying like you're not good at that, or the only way that you are at this level in any of your communities is because you used your charm, or you slept your way there, or you did people favors, or whatever it was. And then also, like, I've seen your comments. I've seen your comments in your videos and sometimes on your Instagram posts. And I've seen emails that like that we have all shared with each other, that they are disgusting, and they're unhinged. Like, it goes anywhere from, you know, you just think that you're pretty playing witch or whatever, like something very, very boring and tasteless, to things that are very disturbing, that, I mean, I think if I talked about, I probably would get demonetized. But like, there's threats that are sent to many of you. And there's this really weird, deep-rooted misogyny and hatred of women in these spaces, and like incel energy in specifically ceremonial spaces. And I mean, I guess I kind of do understand why, but I think you might all have better words for that. So if you're comfortable, can you all give like an experience, or just something that you have experienced on your own in these spaces that is like just a blatant show of misogyny? I'm sure that could be a laundry list, but like pick, your top 3 or something.
Well, I guess I'll talk about the chaos magic scene really quick, because I do want to shout out all the awesome male chaos magicians that I've ever met that have been so kind and wonderful to me. The chaos magic community, though, I do feel like it is small, and it is very rare that I come across another chaos magician. People are usually pretty dope, actually. People are really, really fun to hang out with. They're very open-minded. And I will say that the majority of the misogyny that I personally experienced comes from self-identified ceremonial magicians, not necessarily chaos magicians. And so I actually think that I don't experience as much misogyny than the rest of the women on this panel. So I'm really, really interested to hear what everyone else is going to say. But from the chaos magic perspective, most of the male chaos magicians I've met have been fantastic. I will say it's a very, very male dominated group. So it is very seldom that I ever meet another feminine presenting chaos magician. So yeah, but I guess, oh my gosh, a laundry list of things I've experienced. You get the normal misogyny in the comments that are commenting on your physical appearance, or trying to get with you, or I've had people pretend to be interested in my work only to get closer to me to try to, sleep with you or whatever. There's all those types of situations. And that's just kind of like I would say that's like the low level. That's going to happen no matter what community you're in. But it really comes down to, for me, I've had moments where I will be speaking with a man as my male counterpart, and I will say the exact same thing as my male counterpart, and it is perceived completely differently. So my male counterpart, it will be funny, hilarious, genius. For me, I come off as, I don't know if I'm allowed to swear, but
Of course.
can I? Okay.
Yeah.
I come off as a bitch, even if I say the exact same thing as my male counterpart. So I think there is that aspect of it too. Or if I say something, come up with an idea, and then my male counterpart says the exact same thing, all of a sudden it was his idea, and it is genius. And this is not just, one male counterpart by any means. I've worked with a lot of men in the space, and honestly, it's kind of not their fault that it is perceived that way from the audience. I think it's the culture as a whole, the way that we are perceiving men versus women. And I know that you kind of define those terms, like when we say women, we're talking, it's a very inclusive word here. So yeah, I guess instances like that really do bother me. I do feel as though I have to have a man signing off on my work in order to be seen as credible. So I need someone, typically a man, to approve and say, yeah, Ivy's work was great, or this video was great, this book was great, or the essay that she wrote is great. If a man signs off on it, then now all of a sudden I'm credible. And I've had these conversations with many women in the occult spaces, and I know that it's absolutely still an issue. But again, I think the other women on this panel have experienced way worse misogyny than I have, so I'm just going to go ahead and hand it off.
I actually want to just say something similar of that exact conversation that you said that you had, or like that exact situation. Marshall and I actually did a test. This was like a year or two ago. It was a while ago. But he was curious. So he was like, would you test this with me? And I said, yes. And him and I posted the exact same things, like different photos, I'm sure, but like on Instagram. But we posted essentially the exact same things, just at different times. And his reactions were overwhelmingly positive, and me and I think it was one other or two other people that were femme or just like cis women that posted the same thing. And it was like questioning, like, well, you don't even know what you're talking about. And it was like all of these things of all of a sudden this overwhelmingly positive reaction that Marshall got, we did not get, despite the fact that Marshall said the same thing as the same women that said the same thing like months later. So we did an experiment, and sure enough, that's what we found. And Marshall was like, not surprised, but upsetting. Regardless. So interesting that you say that. Yeah, Lynn?
Yeah, really good points, you all. And one thing I sort of wanted to bring people's attention before I share some experiences is the demographic differences between our communities. We all fall in this sort of outsider umbrella, this magical practitioner umbrella. But we're a niche within a niche within a niche, and those demographics look very different. So in the witchcraft space, it's much more female dominated. And then I would say in the ceremonial magic space, although it's getting better, it is male dominated, period. I can see the breakdown of my audience on YouTube and see there's a lot more guys watching my content, which is an honor, right? It's a blessing and an honor to have the attention of all types of people with what I'm sharing with the world. But yeah, there is a lot more men. And another thing is, we get into we go down these paths of study, of practice, right? Of getting to know ourselves. And we suddenly think we're divorced from the world we live in. And the truth is we are not. To use the language of the occult, our communities are the microcosm in the macrocosm. And so all of these issues we're experiencing, not just with misogyny, but dare I say, all the political issues we're also experiencing, they can find themselves reflected even in our protected spaces sometimes. And that's something to be cognitive of. So I think, and I believe this, especially within the context of an initiated organization or order, we have a process of stripping down, of analyzing ourselves, holding the mirror up to ourselves, trying to figure out what's going on there. And that really helps people shed or understand things a little bit better. But, we still have these issues. We have these issues of misogyny. We have these issues of people not working through their biases and sort of the, I'm going to make up a term here, red colored glasses, right? They see the world. And there's a lot of ego in that as well. So to share some of my experiences, which are numerous, I will start with the most benign. I remember when I first joined the OTO, it was perhaps more wild than it is nowadays. But when I first started coming around, even before I initiated, I was just kind of feeling out the waters. I was absolutely pounced on by guys who wanted to date me or sleep with me. And I wasn't interested, and a lot of the men I encountered did not take no for an answer. As you experience in the broader world, like if you were to go to a bar. And in my opinion, our magical orders, I come to them to practice magic, right? To practice these beautiful, elaborate rituals. And I will say there is something so special being in a temple, whether it's Golden Dawn or, the Gnostic Mass, where we have all of the props, the equipment, the incense is going, the candles, the lights are dimmed, everyone has on their full regalia. And you're all working in sync with each other, and it's beautiful. It's nothing else like it. And I come for that, right? I don't come for, fast and cheap, dates and all of that. If I wanted that, go to a Fet Life meetup. So I think, being able to take no for an answer is something some gentlemen struggle with. And that escalated too. Men would send me pictures of their penis. That happened. The usual. And that's sad, right? I shouldn't say the usual, but I am. And so, yeah, there's like that. But then on the broader scale, I think something that happens a lot with me is, I have teachers, I have had teachers, and I have a context, right? I'm studying under a bishop in the EGC, which is the 𝘸𝘵𝘶 𝘵𝘠 which is the ecclesiastical arm of the OTO. So there's a context right there and a structure. I'm a part of an initiatory tradition that I'm learning and studying under. So I'm very open to getting feedback from my teachers, and I'm learning things within a context. So if you're learning magic or other correspondences outside of the ones I'm learning, they're going to be different, right? Or you're going to approach things differently. And so when I'm presenting stuff that I've learned from my tradition and my experiences, people are very quick to try, gentlemen, men are very quick to try to teach me things. And I'm like, wow, no offense, but I'm not really interested in you teaching me something I already know in the context of my initiatory tradition. And yeah, they really view, me as not knowing what I'm talking about sometimes when I really deeply do know what I'm talking about. Those sort of things happen. And then the final one I get a lot of is just really unhinged hate. Really disturbing kind of stalkery behavior where, you're on the internet, everyone experiences it, you block someone, they come back, they make multiple accounts, they have sock puppet accounts, and they just say profoundly weird and ignorant things. This is a shame, right? Because in my tradition, and this is something I want to make very clear here, Thelema was founded from the very inception with two people, Aleister Crowley and Rose. And all of the orders Aleister Crowley was very involved in, like the OTO and his founding of the AA from the very beginning, welcomed with open arms people of all genders, all sexuality, all races. This wasn't something like they went back in time and like, oh, well, we weren't allowing women in. No, from the very inception, Thelema was open, right, to all people. And that goes back to our central sacred holy text, the Book of the Law. Every man and every woman is a star. And of course, that's understood to be all people of all genders. And so despite this, and in our holy text, this absolute call for freedom, and embracing and loving ourselves and the diversity of the human condition, there still seems to be people who end up in our spaces and in our communities who carry this baggage of ignorance. And that unfortunately for me, as someone who's public facing as a writer on YouTube, I see that. But that being said, there's some fantastic things being done, and we'll save that for later. I'll let you go, Lauren.
I'm thinking about the question, and there's a handful of incidents of like specific misogyny that I've experienced. I think I've experienced less of it because, by the time I really came into the Thelemic world, about maybe 10, 15 years ago, I was already an insufferable know-it-all with things like Kabbalah and like Western ceremonial magic, and I knew like all my correspondences, and so like I just kind of came in really in an insufferable kind of way. And so I don't think anybody dared to try to tell me anything because I was probably the one sort of like, schooling people and lecturing them. So I'm a little bit embarrassed about kind of, how I showed up at that particular point in time. But I do think it insulated me from a lot of the, well, sweetie, haven't you just read Eliphas Levi, or haven't you just like, because I kind of came in, already kind of, bat swinging from that perspective. So yeah, people didn't fuck with me, and that was kind of great.
Awesome.
I did get a few, a number of kind of misogynist comments when I started serving as a priestess in the Gnostic Mass about 10 years ago. And I think the culture has changed. I also think I get fewer comments now that I'm in my early 40s as opposed to my early 30s. But I would get things like, oh, like, I would love to see you, priestess. And, for context, the Gnostic Mass is a ritual that sometimes involves female nudity. So there's kind of an association with it of like, oh, you see somebody serve as priestess, you're gonna get to see her naked. And that's, I think, gotten better as the tradition in general and the Thelemic and specifically OTO, because the Gnostic Mass is a Ordo Templi Orientis, or EGC ritual. The acronyms can get a little bit confusing, but I think it's gotten a bit better as the culture has changed a bit there. Um, I don't hold on to those things so much anymore. I think more about like larger systemic obstacles. Like, for instance, in one magical organization I was involved with, we were renting at a Masonic lodge because there was a member who was also a Freemason, and he was able to get access to rental space. And finding rental space is really hard around here. And it always troubled me because, okay, the dues that I was paying were going towards an organization that did not admit women as part of its thing. And, there's only so many solutions to that if that's the only way you can find affordable rental space. So those are the kind of things that I focus my attention on more now is how are those systemic barriers still kind of baked into our culture? Um, I think I'm also fortunate because I don't hang out a lot in online spaces. And I think the online space has really changed since like the early message boards that I was involved in, like way back in like the 90s and 2000s when I was just first starting, you didn't have little avatars. Nobody really would know your gender. And that changed a lot of things. I noticed a lot changing, and Olivia, I was resonating with you when you shared this experiment that you did. Like when I had Avatar started being used on Reddit, the number of upvotes I got changed dramatically, very quickly, just by having, an avatar that had little like eyelashes. Crazy to me. No change in the kind of things I was responding to. Like, so there's so much like internalized misogyny too that I'm constantly contending with. And that to me feels like the main obstacle and the main enemy right now is like, how do I carry this inside myself?
Yeah, to continue on with what you said about the differences between online and in-person spaces, I do agree. I think the anonymity, even though gender is often sort of suggested now by like usernames or even avatars, the anonymity of the online space makes people have an extraordinary level of confidence when it comes to being misogynistic in the space. This is something that I've experienced somewhat explicitly. So I co-host a podcast called 𝘺𝘵𝘶𝘵 𝘾𝙤𝘧𝘾𝘵. And for me online, there has been an odd fetishization of intellect with being a like woman in the ceremonial space, and this idea that oh, I'm a good magician because I'm doing ceremonial magic, and I'm also intelligent because I'm both a scientist and like I have that podcast, and a lot of that sort of intellectual stuff happens. Those discussions occur on the podcast. And I've had men use that to try and sleep with me and do like sex magic without my consent, right? And having to shut that down and say, I'm not gonna like engage in that with you for a variety of reasons. This isn't appropriate to do on like our third conversation. And so having to set those boundaries, and then, being called a bitch, being called a catfish, being called all kinds of names because I was unwilling to engage, which was really unfortunate. But within its initiatory traditions that I'm in, I've experienced a more subtle misogyny, and a lot of it was in the sense of expertise, right? So I'm in an alchemical group, and we do a lot of alchemical work together, and it's really great to be able to do this with other people who are also well versed in the tradition. But as someone who is a biochemist by training and by trade, I know what I'm doing. When we talk about we're going to take a substance and we're going to separate it out into the salt, sulfur, and mercury, I understand what that means at a chemical level. I know the tools that we need to do it. I understand the processes, and I also understand sort of the spiritual essence behind these things that we see within alchemy itself. And there's been a number of times, much like you were saying, Lynn, where people have felt the need to explain things to me that I am already well aware of, if not even sometimes more aware of. It's like, no, I thoroughly understand the chemistry that's happening in this flask. Like, you do not need to explain this to me. That's happened a couple of times in that particular group, which has been frustrating in many cases. Unfortunately, I think what I find more frustrating than anything is that I think in many cases, it's not meant to come across that way, right? They simply want to educate, which I can empathize with. But it is the sense of like, why do you feel the need to educate me instead of first determining whether or not I have the knowledge to begin with? Which the fact that I, at that time, had already hosted multiple extractions, I think probably spoke for itself. But those are sort of my two primary examples that have been unfortunate.
Well, I mean, a lot of us have been in this practice in this online space, or really not even just on this online space, but just these spaces, these communities for a good amount of time. I think all of us if I'm correct, at least 10 years for everybody, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Okay. So, we've seen a minimum of a decade of how this has changed, right? So, like, obviously, times have changed. The words, the phrases, I mean, as occultists, as practitioners, we know that words carry meaning and carry energy. So, we've seen language shift in our timeline as we have grown with our practice. Have you seen um, anything like that, like any language or any attitudes or the way that you've been treated as a woman in these spaces change for the better because of more conversations like this happening publicly, or more like has there been positive impacts or positive changes in the time that you have practiced in these spaces is really my question.
Well, I don't think my I don't think my answer is going to be very happy. For me, I think it's actually gotten a little bit worse, but I also want to give context as to why I think it's gotten worse for me specifically. As my
Mm.
platform has grown, let's say under 10K subscribers, I actually had only but fantastic comments. People were so nice to engage with. And then something about the algorithm, once your channel hits 10K, they start pushing your channel. You know, Olivia, we've talked about this before.
We've
They
talked about
start
this a
pushing your
lot,
channel out
10 or
to
20.
everybody. Yeah, exactly. And so you end up attracting a lot of different people to your channel that don't necessarily have your best interest in mind. So I will say for me specifically in the occult scene and specifically online with my platform, I've only ever seen it get worse as the platform itself grows. So my answer is not very happy. So yeah, I think my perspective is a little bit skewed here. I hope that the other women on this panel have something different to say, but for me, it has gotten to a point where I've questioned many times whether I want to be on YouTube at all anymore, whether I
Me
want to
too.
even be perceived. I don't want to make content. I especially have shifted the content that I do make because I used to do a lot of vlogs, a lot of, personal rituals and sharing just me and my life and a lot of personal things. And I've got to the point where I don't want to share my personal life at all with the public anymore. And so I mostly engage in interviews, or sometimes I'll throw out a how-to video or maybe even just an opinion piece for fun if I'm feeling like it. But I have really slowed down on any sort of super personal content that I used to put out because of that, because of the misogyny, and because of the hate, and not being taken seriously, even though someone that I know my male counterpart has done before has received a completely different response, like we've spoken about. So
Mm.
yeah, I wish I had a better answer, but for me, it has only gotten worse.
That's really unfortunate. And yeah, unfortunately, I think it fluctuates with the numbers, like the amount of times that I straight up have hovered over the delete the account. Like you don't even know that I'm just like, today's the day. Like I'm just like having a full fucking crash out. And I'm just like, today's the fucking day. And then I'm like, no, because I enjoy it. But just like you, Ivy, I've changed my content a lot. And like I don't post a lot of witchy stuff anymore because of the responses and the way that people treat. But that's not really like rooted in misogyny. It's just the way that people treat creators, unfortunately, because to them, we are 2D, like fake, this just, oh, their feelings can't get hurt because we don't ever see their feelings get hurt type of thing. Whereas like, no, no, I may be a lot like a very heavy earth sign type of person, but I'm a sensitive bitch. Okay. So just saying.
Well, I'm really sorry to hear that, Ivy, but I think one thing I heard, and I think it's true, is being perceived comes with a cost.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of, viewers on our platforms and, our audiences need to remember that, it costs us to be here. So enjoy.
Mhm.
Um, so how have things gotten better for me? They have gotten drastically better. I am doing, it's still very costly to be online. And one thing I like to remind people of, and something that's very helpful for me, is there will come a time where my YouTube channel, I've made everything I want to make, and I will wrap that bundle up and be done with it. It's really beautiful when I'm just finishing up this book now. The writing part is fine, but the editing of the proofs and all that part of the book, that's what I'm in right now. But that's a project I will bundle up and it'll be done, and then I can move on. And so that's very comforting for me personally. I look forward to returning to my more reclusive state. But until that mission is complete, I am here, and I feel like I'm getting better. Well, two things are happening. The first one is I'm getting better with knowing where to put my energy. Um, I want to be an open door for those who are seeking, for those who are exploring, dabbling, experimenting. I truly believe in Thelema and ceremonial magic. It has changed my life beautifully. And I mourn the fact that some of our niche traditions are like an endangered animal, right? It's so small. And this is me watering the garden. This is me planting some native plants to say, hey, this is a beautiful thing that can radically improve how you see yourself, radically improve your life. And that's what I want people to get out of it. And that is going to look different for everyone. So I'm not saying, hey, come join this organization. The door's open if you want to come. But again, just being a place where people feel comfortable and safe. Now, that being said, I think it was very crucial to this to realize a lot of people online and in person, and in and out of our organizations, approach you in bad faith. And so what do I mean by that? I mean, someone is coming into your space, whether online or in person, not from a place of being genuine. They're not coming it from a place of goodwill. And they're, to use online slang, they're a troll. They're coming at it from a place to do bad by you. And I had to realize that, hey, not everyone seeking is actually seeking. And, having those boundaries of very quickly being to determine who is and who isn't. And sometimes you can't know, right? It's the dance of being open enough to invite the right people in, but closed enough to protect yourself. Obviously there is a line to cross, right? And especially when it comes in this very hostile political climate, if someone is coming at me, for example, being very ignorant about queer issues, as a queer person myself, that's not gonna fly. Adios. If someone is being very hateful towards me, my existence is not a free speech zone. You can go be ignorant and hateful somewhere else and work through that somewhere else. I am not the space for that. And so cutting that out has been very helpful. Quickly removing myself from situations that were damaging to me, that were unhealthy for me, were not conducive for my personal growth and well-being, right? I mourn the fact that all of the places I have ventured have not been good. A lot of them have been fantastic. But sometimes you find yourself in a place that is downright hostile and toxic and not doing you well. And so removing myself quickly. And one last thing that has changed on my journey, and I hate to say this, but it's true, especially in this conversation on gender and equality, is, I became public about my being engaged to my now fiance, who is a well-respected and well-regarded man in the community. And it's too bad that that came with men backing off. But I think a lot of people can relate to that. People are, my fiance is Richard Kaczynski. He's known as the biographer of Aleister Crowley, specifically Perdurabo. He is an incredibly beautiful soul and individual, incredibly kind. But he does take some weight in the Thelemic community, and so people think twice about harassing me because they know I will go to Richard and be like, hey, this person's a problem, and they will experience consequences. And we should not have men in order for men to experience consequences, but that's sort of where we are at now. And so that's kind of how things have changed for me in that regard.
Well, I'll start where you left off, Lynn, because it's like, yeah, I'm also married to David Shoemaker, who's, pretty prominent presence in the Thelemic world as well. And you're right, like as soon as I was, publicly known to be, involved with him, the tone changed a bit. So, I think that there is something about it where we may not be representative kind of, examples here. In my case, I don't really have an online presence, so to speak. Part of that is just because I don't have the kind of thick skin. Part of it is I don't have time to create content. Part of it is my professional work, right? Keeping that separate, because I have to be kind of front facing in my work. Um, I think internet culture has gotten worse, and it's hard to be able to separate out what someone would say to my face versus what someone might say to me online if I was more visible. I don't know that difference there. It's hard to really say, but I know my life is too short to hang out in places that are toxic. I don't have time for that. I don't have energy for that. It just sucks me down into something that leaves me feeling worse, does not make the world a better place, and doesn't line up with what I'm trying to do in my magical work. So I ain't got time for that. So I focus on other things that really are doing the kind of work that I care about. So this is where I want to brag on Temple of the Silver Star a little bit. So traditionally in, a magical esoteric order, you would address people as frater or sor, right? Brother or sister. And that really excludes people who are non-binary or gender fluid. So what I love about Temple of the Silver Star is a few years ago, we did away with using frater and sor. We just used the Latin term stella, which means star. And that's a reference to, in Thelema, every man and every woman is a star. It's not about what gender you are, right, in this particular life or body or incarnation or way of being in the world. It's about your inner star nature. And that I think is absolutely revolutionary. So, in terms of things that I've seen that are positive changes, like that would be example number one.
I think for me, I want to first begin this off by saying that in some of the initiatory traditions that I'm a part of, I've met wonderful men, and they have been so helpful on my journey and so insightful about sort of the kind of magic that we're doing together. And it's been really wonderful. And I think I have had a good experience in the cases where there has been sort of these subtle comments or these subtle suggestions that perhaps I don't know anything, even though like I do consider myself in many ways a scholar in addition to a practitioner. And they've been willing to hear me out, and we've been able to have these conversations, and they haven't gotten defensive about it. And I've seen real changes in these, men who called themselves my friend, and they're willing to sort of grow when I point these things out. And that has been really encouraging in many ways. It's sort of reignited my faith in humanity a little bit, which has not necessarily been at its highest in recent years. But I have seen a much more positive shift in person, I think, than I have online. I think online the vitriol is a bit more extreme than it used to be, which is unfortunate. I do get more pushback online. I also, I tend to present more academic perspectives on things, and it does often come across as being a bitch or being super stuck up or snobby. And if a man presented that to people in the same way, it wouldn't be perceived that way. And I still find that very frustrating. But I certainly will say that I think in person, in a lot of the groups that I'm in, I'm seeing it change for the better. And having those conversations is causing actual change, which is something I'm very grateful for. So I don't know, maybe I should just leave online altogether because that's where it's getting worse and focus more of my time in person.
Can I
the
actually,
online. Oh, no,
sorry,
please.
before we go to the next thing, can I actually comment on that really quick? I think that's what it is the online community versus the in-person community. Because for me in particular, all my interactions with occult, ceremonial people, chaos magic people, it's all online because I am a content creator on YouTube. I was in covens for 4 years, but after that, I just decided I don't want to be part of any magical groups or orders anytime soon. So I do not have an in-person group right now. I think it would be very different. I mean, you all are part of different organizations, right? Different orders. And I am not. I have chosen to take a step back and not be part of any sort of organizations and just practice solo magic. So I think that's why my experience is so skewed, is because it is all online, all of these interactions. So I agree. Online, perhaps getting worse. In person, I'm sure it's getting better.
That's a good point. I've always been solo pretty much. Like I have had a group, but not really a coven. It was just a group of people who also practiced, and it was like we're just here doing silly little things. Like it was never anything that was really, coherent, to be totally honest. It was just kind of to have other people who practiced. And I have had like men in person be terrible, but like most of my interactions with other people who practiced are almost all femi or women. And all the men that I think maybe I can probably count like 3 men that I still am in contact with and that like have not done or said anything to diminish my practice just because I'm a woman or diminish me as a woman in general. So it's interesting because there's that, but like I also don't really get to see a lot of other men in the folk practicing world, and if I, my God, and if I do, it's online anyway, like I don't really have the ability with my lifestyle to get to meet up and like build in-person connections, unfortunately. Um, but at the same time, like I agree the internet is fucking awful. And the emails that I receive from people who are unhinged and illiterate is wild. But also like the online sphere, I don't know, it also has given me this community. Like I have gotten to meet you guys, and I've gotten to meet people like Marshall or Annie, or like one of my very, very good friends, even in person. I met him on Tumblr, and he's in the witchy realm, like, and it's so it's gotten, I think, better for me, but I think I agree with you, Ivy, that the online world, I think, is definitely so much worse, and everybody just needs to go outside and touch grass and like roll around in the dirt and like stop being chronically online.
I also, if I could touch on one more thing, I think there's also a difference in maybe between what we see in person versus online. Within a lot of these initiatory traditions, there is an expectation that you are doing the work and you're sort of moving forward in the initiations and the processes that have been set forth within that particular tradition.
Mhm.
And people who aren't doing the work don't progress. And you can also sort of, I don't know, maybe Lynn and Lauren, you can speak to this, but you can tell when people are making progress in these groups by sort of how their demeanor and their actions and the way that they hold and engage themselves, it does change over time. And you can see that and you can watch the evolution happen. And it also serves as inspiration, right? This is what I aspire to as I also progress in this particular process. And I think online, it's really easy for people to pretend to be these spiritually enlightened individuals when they've done none of the work. Whereas in person, there are actual like gates to ensure that you are doing the work, you are progressing. And one of the ways in which we can measure that progression is the way that you actively engage with like your community. And that can be, people within the initiatory tradition and outside of it. And so I think there's sort of a extra guardrail in person in our initiatory communities that you don't see elsewhere. And that I think also maybe has something to do with it. Like we are actively encouraging you to be better, to be a better person in these initiatory groups. It's sort of the whole purpose. And so with that being the goal, like you do see people getting better, whereas online, that there are no guardrails like that. People can lie about it quite easily.
Yeah.
Well, I think oh, go Lynn
Oh,
and Lauren.
sorry.
No,
Okay,
please.
I just wanted to jump in really fast. Astra, you brought some stuff up, in person versus online, which everyone has been talking about. And I remember when I made the leap. So called myself an occultist probably in 2006. It's been a moment, right? And most of my practice was very myself and reading and focusing on myself. And I remember when I finally did the leap to actually talking to people, talking to the authors I'd come to know through their works, getting to know people in important positions in various organizations and actually meeting them. And they say never meet your heroes, never meet your idols. Well, I did. And every single one of those people, the vast majority were men, just the way the demographics are. I was profoundly impressed. Absolute. I don't have words for how radiant these people are that I've had the pleasure to be in the presence with. And I think this goes back to it works, right? In maybe not all cases. I think some situations, to some degrees, people can fail their way up, right? Let's not discount that. But I think there are certain heroes you can imagine who I'm talking about. Lon Milo Duquette, David Shoemaker, Lauren. Um, Richard Kaczynski and others, I've met these folks and they are projecting that light. So,
I wanted to get to something that you talked about, Astra, that really like has been a change in what I've seen. Like you don't see people emphasizing doing the work as much on like the message boards and kind of the online spaces. And like that's really what it all comes down to. I mean, the evidence is there in the human beings that are around, and there's so much negativity around organizations or initiatory systems that have any kind of hierarchy or degrees. And the thing that's been great about like the Golden Dawn system is it really works to transform who you are. And then if that works as it's supposed to, you have people that are in charge who have done that work and are able to sort of, pay it forward. So, teachers are important. And sometimes I think that one of the downsides of like the online spaces is, all right, there aren't necessarily a sense of gatekeeping or responsibility or, like, all right, who's around? I mean, if there's a membership process, then it filters out people who don't know how to behave in a reasonably, civil and respectful kind of way. That's important. I don't really want to be in a non-gate kept kind of, you know, I mean, I run into people all the time. That's fine. That's great. But I don't want to spend most of my time in a community that hasn't been vetted in some way.
I have so much to say on both what you just said, Lauren, and on Astra's. Where do I start? There's three different points that I want to get to, and I'll try to make them quick. But the first one is how Astra pointed out, there's a difference between online and offline. And I think, kind of like I pointed out in the very beginning of like, I've shifted what I post a lot. I don't really post. I used to be primarily folk witchcraft. And because of just the reaction and like the way that the internet treated me, I stopped because it burnt me out. And now, like I'll get comments of like, you're not even a witch anymore. And it's like, so just because you don't see me practice, now it just doesn't exist. That's kind of the same thing of like, just because you don't see me doing my activist things or whatever, like, why do I have to post this to prove this to get your validation in order to prove that I'm doing the thing, And it's like, I'm not going to do that. And I'll share what I want to share, but it's just it's really strange that the second it's like out of sight, it's like it doesn't exist. It's like that's not how that works. So there's that one. There's another one of similar to that aspect of like what you see is not always reality. And so I kind of want to loop back to like Annabelle, and I'm going to text her after we film this so that I can make sure that I am allowed to put this in. But I'm going to say this just in case she says yes. If you ever watched Green Witch's videos, right? They're so aesthetic. She's out in the mountains and it's very like cottage witch vibes that everybody wants. And she does live that. I've visited her multiple times. I know her in person, and she truly does live these things. But there was a point in time a few years back that I remember her telling me that she said that she wore jeans one time on her channel, and people got so upset with her. But because she wasn't dressed like a pilgrim, everybody's like, the illusion is shattered. What do you mean you're wearing pants? You're a woman. When people found out that she was dating a woman, everybody was like, the trad wife illusion is gone. And this very weird illusion of, because she wanted to portray her craft in the art that it is, now people are portraying her as a person and her craft as only this like bubble instead of understanding these are separate things. So critical thinking, I think, is not common. And then, Lauren, your point, you said that you kind of like being in area.
A gate kept organization. Yeah.
I like that though, because it filters out the people. And, you were talking about how on the forums and online, a lot of people are not stressing so much about doing the work. And that's another one of the things that so many of my peers that online I think are also struggling with, of every time we're like, make sure to do your research, make sure to actually practice, and then people get upset with that of like, oh, all they say is do your research, and without actually telling me what to do. And it's like, it's to do your research, like, and I'm not trying to be super gatekeepy of saying that it's not accessible to you, but it's only going to be accessible to you if you make that effort to make it accessible to you. Like, if you are going to be able to actually do the work where you sit down and you actually do the meditations every day, you actually work that candle every day, you actually do your mantras, you actually show up and do the discipline things. And discipline can look like different things for different people. I think it depends on your energy level of like, for ceremonial things, that's not me. But you know, it can be these little tiny things that you add in every day that can be your discipline. But I think when those words come in of do the work, do the discipline, and do the research, immediately the word gatekeep comes up. And it's like, now you're just trying to make this inaccessible. And it's like, but there's no nuance to this. Like, you are not giving me any nuance in this conversation. And I think that's a really big topic to think about as well. But I think we're definitely getting off topic with the misogyny. I'm sorry.
People hate gatekeeping, and yet.
Yeah. I was gonna jump off what you just said about out of sight, it doesn't exist. That hit the nail on the head, because that's so important to remember about all of your authors and your content creators. You know, all of us are full people and have tremendous lives. And for people who are new, approaching ceremonial magic and the occult and some of these traditions with initiations and, you know, secret societies, I'm going to say something spicy. This is the spiciest thing I've said so far. I think there's two types of occultists out there. One is the person you'll run into who is so quick to brag about the initiations they've had and the people they know and the things they've done, and they have this laundry list. Look at me, I'm so important. And the other type of occultist, either they can't tell you because they took oaths, or for the protection of the work they're doing, or for the structure of the initiation, or just for the privacy of the individuals involved. They won't tell you who they know. They won't tell you what they've done. They won't tell you what degrees they've had. And I'm not saying it's taboo not to, you know, it's not taboo to like shout your degrees, right? But it kind of also is, right? Like, or shouting who you know. Also keep in mind, when you approach ceremonial magic, these are secret societies that run deep. It's an established tradition, and so the vast majority of the people you will meet are people that are not public, they're very private, and there is a whole world that is going to be out of sight from you, even when you initiate into the organization. We talk about inner court, outer court, to use Golden Dawn terms. You know, we talk about, you know, in OTO we have the three grades, you know, man of earth, lovers, hermit, you know, so your experience of the organization and the individuals even in it is going to change the more you progress on your path. And people have no idea who I am, but the people who have seen me do magic have been in ritual with me. They know who I know. The right people already know that. And so for some random online troll, and I get this a lot, to be like, oh, you're just cosplaying, you don't know anything. It's like, okay, you don't know because you are not the right person to know. And I'm sorry to say that, and that might hurt some people's egos, but it's true. You're not in my initiatory tradition, and you don't know these things because you're not there.
Right.
That's it.
I mean, all of that. Okay, so we kind of covered, I mean, we're also coming up on time pretty soon, and I've kept you for a good amount of time, but we've covered all of your initiations and kind of your practices and what those look like. We've also covered what misogyny is and what that's looked like for each of you, and how that's kind of, you know, damaged, or I mean, I guess stunted or put blocks in our ways of being able to progress, especially in a community space. And as you know, Lynn, you're an author, Ivy, you're an author, and like there's a lot of blocks that puts of, because we're being dismissed in these spaces, even though we have just as much right to be in those spaces as anybody else. So in that case, say, you know, somebody is in these spaces, whether they're women or men or in between or neither, how would you suggest moving forward how they can better the community for everybody and for each of you? Because for me, I think it's like witchcraft specifically, especially folk, it's so based in the feminine right now. And like, I almost feel like men don't feel welcome in the folk traditions a lot of the time because of that, which is a little upsetting. You know, they feel like they have to call themselves something different if they're like, can I use witch or do I have to use something else? And it's like, you know, these are not the things that you should be super worried about. Like, so it's interesting to me that I'm in like more of a female dominated, whereas you are all in more of like a male dominated space. But for me, I think just to make sure that everybody is comfortable. Like I said, the folk practice is for everybody. It's for the general public. It's for people, and it's for community. That's not gendered. It doesn't matter. Anybody can be in there. And to stop putting so much weight on this like divine feminine, on this like womb centric thing. And I do think that those are important things, especially for people who are pregnant or people who are wanting to be pregnant or, anything of that sort. I totally think that that's important. But to encapsulate that and to umbrella it in all of the folk traditions it's repetitive, and honestly it is very Western. Like it's not super based in a lot of things. That's going to be a whole different thing, but essentially folk practices for everybody. And I think that we just need to be able to understand the balance that, yes, while the divine feminine is also very big in folk practices, I think there is divine masculine energy. And also, we don't even have to use those words or have to use those dichotomies, because as we know as practitioners, nothing is black and white, everything is nuanced. So to stick with those two is also very limiting, in my opinion. So really just being able to have nuance in the folk realm. But Ivy, what would your suggestion be for anybody in those spaces and chaos magician spaces?
Okay, I wrote down a whole list and I'm going to try to get it down as fast as possible. But I wrote it down because I wanted to be organized. This is something that I really wanted to bring into this panel was solutions. Like, how do we change this? What can we do moving forward? Because I know we're not all here just to vent about our experiences. Like, we actually want change. So I wrote down a couple things I wanted to bring up. But first, I want to respond to you, Olivia, where you're talking about a lot of these like free flowing ecstatic practices like witchcraft and folk magic are seen somehow as very feminine, whereas the more rational intellectual practices in ceremonial magic are seen as more masculine. And it seems that there's, a more male dominated presence in ceremonial magic, more female dominance in the witchcraft and folk magic scenes. And so I think that we need to start looking at just how we perceive intellectual capacity, how we receive what was the other things I was just talking about? I had a whole point that I was going to monologue on. Rationality, I think, as well. And also just intuition. For some reason, intuition is linked to women, but then being rational, logical thinkers is related to men. So I think kind of dismantling that in particular, not just in the occult magical spaces, but really in the broader, all communities that we're in, is really the start of tearing down some of the misogyny. Because I know so many women, and especially on this panel, it is represented where a lot of us are rational thinkers. I myself have a scientific background and I work in a lab for my day job. So I think that it's really interesting to me how that is seen as more masculine. So anyways, that's a whole rant in itself, but I want to get back to your question. So how do we change this? First, I think doing something like this panel, and really talking about how misogyny is still very much an issue, because I think there's this misconception that, oh, misogyny doesn't exist anymore in 2025. Yes, it absolutely does. So I think doing this panel really does kind of help the solution. And then also looking at leadership and trying to diversify that, whether it's with, adding in more women or feminine presenting individuals or people of color, things like that, queer magicians. I think diversifying who we see as our leaders is really important, because for so long in so many different orders and institutions, it seems to be very male dominated. And that just kind of, perpetuates the cycle. I also think, and this was actually something I wrote down that was inspired by Lynn, because I think there are so many women in occult history that are overlooked. I know that Lynn did a whole lecture on this, and actually, Lynn, you can totally speak about this more if you want, but we talk about like Aleister Crowley, for example. We talk about all these male magicians, and some of them did some great work and it's worth talking about them, but for some reason we forget about all the women in the past that have done amazing magical things and have written amazing works that deserve to be read and recognized. So that's another thing too, is going into occult history and lifting up some of the female voices. Another thing that I wanted to say is, so hold please, because I really want to make sure I get all this out. Internalized misogyny. Okay. So internalized misogyny, I have definitely had moments where I question my own gnosis and I ask myself, is this too feminine? And that is something that I have really struggled with as well, believing my own gnosis. But then when someone else says something similarly, a man perhaps, that is saying that is sharing similar gnosis, all of a sudden I'm now valid. And I can say to myself, okay, that is actually a legit experience. I shouldn't have to rely on, you know, a man's credibility in order to trust my own intuition and my own gnosis on something. So I've also noticed that I tend to be more forgiving. And here's the thing is that I have really tried to work hard on this own internalized misogyny. And I think that a lot of us are guilty of this. I think the community in general is way more forgiving of men who make mistakes versus women who make mistakes. Because as soon as a woman makes a mistake, it doesn't matter if she owns up to it, she's written off. And we see this not even in just occult spaces, but also in pop culture. If we talk about Taylor Swift, okay, whether you love or hate Taylor Swift, she has had massive smear campaigns against her. And we just see that where a woman is never really allowed to make a mistake. She has to be perfect at all times. But a man can make a mistake over and over and over again, yet his career continues to prosper. So that is something that that I think we also need to consider. But I'll get off my soapbox. I think that was pretty much it. So go for it, Lynn.
Yeah, some great points, Ivy. Thank you. And I have 3 things I want to say. And then Ivy spoke, and now I have 4. I want to first address what you're talking about women in ceremonial magic. And I want to make this abundantly clear. Women, in terms of our traditions, have always been there. Just like queer people have always been there, so have women and femme folks, period. The thing is, though, you have to understand is the history there. So when it comes to things like Freemasonry, for example, women were not admitted. So of course, naturally, historically, the scholars on Freemasonry were men because women weren't a part of that. Now we do have a lot of more organizations open to women, such as we've been talking about the Paramasonic fraternity, so not Paramasonic is the technical term meaning Masonic-like, such as the OTO or Ordo Templi Orientis, which Laura and I are a part of. But, you know, women have always been there, but, you know, in their work, and we see this with the Golden Dawn, we see this throughout ceremonial magic, has filtered in, but either under a male name or through the work of their husbands. And women just simply were not given the opportunities to publish that men have. So their work tends to be more in the day-to-day running of things. And not only was the founding of Thelema happened because of a woman, it persisted and still exists as a tradition because of women. And yes, I will absolutely send that link talking about women in ceremonial magic to highlight from our tradition, Thelema. You know, obviously there's all of the Scarlet Women, which I'll talk about in a second, but we also, to bring spotlight to Jane Wolfe, Phyllis Suckler, people who have carried the light of Gnosis into our present day. So to my 3 points, you know, I guess they call this a call to action. So this is for everyone watching who's made it this far. What can I do? I'm chomping at the bit. What can I do? And here's some of my suggestions, things that I think would be fantastic going forward. The first one, when it comes to Thelema, I would like to encourage everyone, specifically the magically minded folks, to become educated around what Thelemic terms actually mean. Because in our tradition, there's a lot of words, even if you read our holy text, that seem like they're saying something different, but you have to understand what it actually means in the context of the tradition. And I see a lot of harmful things coming from either deliberate misinterpretation or just simply, you know, people don't know what they don't know. And so I want to encourage people to move past a lot of the bad faith takes I see on the internet of understanding our stuff. And there are several things I want to talk about in Thelema just really rapidly. If you want to know more, go check out my YouTube channel. But the first one is the term used in our tradition called solar phallic. And so you talk about the rising of the Kundalini and people say, oh, that's just the penis, it's only for men. Absolutely not. It's a reference to the rising of the Kundalini that is available to all humans. Doesn't matter your physiology or your genital configuration, your gender, all of that stuff. So we all are on this path of Thelema. We are all human beings seeking to know and do our wills, regardless of your body, your gender, your presentation. This is your personal path, and it is a path for you. You do not have to be a man to be a Thelemite and do Thelemic magic. That's a misunderstanding of our tradition and our magic. The second thing I want to say is this Astra made a note of this, and I want to say this now, is what the term Scarlet Woman means in our tradition, and this conversation around one of our Thelemic goddesses, or could be considered a goddess, known as Babylon. I've given quite a detailed lecture at Mystic South this past year, and I'll be giving another one at Sacred Spaces coming up in February. But I also have a few little lectures and stuff on my YouTube channel. But Babylon, when it goes back to, obviously there's a lot of modern interpretations of Babylon, so that aside, going back to what it traditionally means, Babylon is a goddess that exists within our initiatory system of mysticism. She is the force or archetype or goddess that aids you in crossing something called the abyss. Which I won't go too far into, but she serves a very specific role in that. And then when we talk about the emergence of Thelema, Lauren's getting a book. Yeah. So when we talk about Thelema and this term, the Scarlet Woman, this is another one that is so profoundly misunderstood, and I want to just bring it home because it's misinterpreted in a misogynistic and harmful way towards women. I see this again and again, and boy, I'm glad I have a platform to talk about this. So our essential sacred holy text, the Book of the Law, talks about this magical position called the beast and the scarlet woman. And so these positions are spiritual positions, right? And they are to usher in what we consider the new aeon, or the aeon of the child. And so in Thelema, we believe there's something called aeonic succession over time. And it's based on astrology and a little bit of mythology, all that good stuff. And as humankind evolves, we're under different magical paradigms, and the magical formula is very different. So when we had what would be considered the Abrahamic religions, and I just want to note that I know the term Abrahamic is outdated, but it's the one most people know. But when we had Abrahamic religions, we had something called the Osirian magical formula. And then when, the equinox of the gods happened, we're now under a new formula. And in order to usher in this new magical formula, this new age for humankind, we have magical positions to fill. And these aren't just flippant terms. They have important context and meaning and significance. And when Phyllis Seckler talks about these positions, specifically the Scarlet Women, she talks about this woman filling this role has to have a very high degree of spiritual attainment. So it's not just some random person. And so that's what we get. That's the beast and the Scarlet Woman. Now, unfortunately, and so again, when you read the Book of the Law, and there's all these very specific instructions about what the Scarlet Woman should be doing and how she should be living, and people interpret those as instructions for all Thelemite women. Absolutely not. The charge for you as a Thelemite woman is to know and do your will. And that's going to look different for every single individual person because we have different wills. I'm a different person from Rose Edith Kelly, Aleister Crowley's first wife. I'm a different person from Lauren, right? We're out here in the world doing different things, and because we're different people, and that's beautiful. Same with women, same with men. So when you read these instructions in the Book of the Law, it's not telling you have to just fit in this tiny mold. That's a very destructive interpretation, especially as a feminist myself, fighting for women to have options in their life and how they live their life. That's what it's all about. And that's what Thelema is about as well, is to know and do our wills. Wow, that was a lot. Just really, really quick, I had just going right past my other points. I'll bring this up again. You as an individual, what you can do is protect your time and energy and have good boundaries. If you're going into an initiation, go in eyes wide open. If you're asked to do an oath you don't agree with, don't take that oath. Walk out of there. If you're asked to do something you don't feel comfortable with in a bad way, that's like against your ethics, don't do that thing. Don't take an oath in bad faith, something that you don't agree with. And that's okay, right? Sometimes an initiation isn't for you, and just be in a space of personal strength to be aware of that. And the last thing, and most important for people in leadership positions, I think be aware of ethics, right? So be aware, if you're in a position of power and leadership in an organizational structure, you have a higher moral code you should be aspiring and upholding, right? And that's going to be like, don't require women to sleep with you to get opportunities to be a side officer and initiation. Don't expect sexual favors, don't pressure people. When you come into this space, when you're serving in that role in a leadership position, you should be there to serve the community and not try to treat it like your own personal candy shop and get as much as you can from individuals. That's unethical, and that is uncalled for, and that is unacceptable. Thank you.
I could talk with y'all for hours. Lynn, I love the way you just kind of set all that up, because it means, okay, now I can talk about the Golden Dawn side and not so much the Thelema side, because like you've got that covered. It makes me so happy. So first of all, if you're a man listening to this, you're probably already part of the solution. So I say that. If you're a woman or a gender fluid person, really looking deeply into your own internalized misogyny is so, so, so important. I mean, the more inner work I do on this, like the clearer I get on all of it. And yeah, I think a lot of it really is just, leadership setting the tone that needs to be set. So I was rushing over and grabbing this book because I wanted to get the language exactly right. So like in the Golden Dawn, there's an obligation that is taken for people that are coming up to the Adeptus Minor grade. And so that's basically the level at which, you would assume a certain amount of leadership and responsibility in a traditional Golden Dawn patterned order. And as part of the obligation, one of the clauses is, I further promise to support the admission of both sexes to our order on a perfect equality. So like this has been baked in since like the late 1800s in the Golden Dawn tradition. Like it's been there from the very beginning. We've had, all right, Florence Farr, Annie Horniman, Pamela Coleman Smith, who actually did the art. And we're starting to actually see the way people describe that tarot deck in ways that actually give, due recognition to the artist who actually brought those together. And the same thing with the Thoth Tarot, like starting to actually see recognition for, not just the men who designed these, but the women who did the art, Frida Harris. It's amazing. If you have a chance to go to the exhibit in London where they have the actual paintings, it's mind blowing. So if you're a tarot, like do all that. So yeah, it's been baked into the Golden Dawn from the very beginning. And, I sort of think of the Golden Dawn as sort of the precursor that we needed to have in order to get to Thelema. So it's been baked in ever since the beginning here in my tradition. And so that's why I've chosen this particular path, because it does have like equality. And that's very hard to come by if it's not baked into the system at some level. So yeah. I have so much more that I could say based on so many things. It's like there's threads going everywhere. But I think if you're starting out on all this, what I would say to myself looking back is not to get bogged down in specific incidents of misogyny. Like there's huge amounts of them. I've had them in my professional organization, and I'm fortunate that in my professional organization, American Academy of Psychotherapists, at a leadership level that I'm now involved with, I can start to see what does this look like, not in a, in sort of a civilian kind of environment, right? And it helps me to be able to see this happens everywhere. It happens in a different way when you're sort of putting like a magical layer over it, but humans are going to be humans. And so for me, I have wasted so much energy, like reading something that Crowley wrote and grappling over it, or reading something from like a alchemical or, older magical text, like even in Abramelin, it says all this stuff about like, women and your wife, and having to kind of filter through things that were not for me. So I guess what I would say is like focus on yourself and focus on not being limited by the misogyny that our whole species has had to deal with to get up to this point where we are now.
Yeah, Lauren, you touched on something I want to make more explicit, which is that the grimoire tradition, much like some of these initiatory orders, has always had women. The unfortunate thing is that many of them at the time were just not there experiences were not made public, because a lot of these sort of the forebears of women in the grimoire tradition were often nuns. They were women in religious orders who had these extreme mystical experiences, especially in the medieval and the Renaissance period. But if we go back even farther, right, we go back all the way to the alchemists. You have Cleopatra the alchemist. You have Mary the Jewish. We've got Hypatia, who was the only woman featured in Raphael's fresco, The School of Athens, right? She's the only one, which just speaks to her incredible impact as a female philosopher of the time. So they've always existed. They just haven't necessarily been put forth. And so this is really actually a call, I think, to women in the ceremonial space. But so much, especially, I see this really in the grimoire tradition, like especially, so much of the writings, like Lauren, you touched on the Abermelin, for example, are written from the perspective of a male or a male presenting practitioner. And so when we read these things, we have to keep that in mind. It is a man who wrote this. There are cultural impacts at the time. For example, like one of the things you'll commonly see in grimoires is, don't do magic if you are bleeding, if you're currently in your cycle. And that obviously is not relevant today. Feel free to do magic when you're, on your cycle. But you have people who still try to use that today to say, oh, well, I can't do magic with you if you're currently bleeding. And it's like, that's ridiculous. Yes, you can. That's stupid. But I would really love to see like more female experiences with magic, especially with the various grimoire texts. Like, right, I think Lynn shared with me a while back an article written by Harper Feist. Is that how you say her last name? Yeah. And she was speaking about how her experience with the HGA was a somewhat more sexual nature. And I think that's true with a lot of our experiences. They sometimes like female experiences with the divine are different than the male experience. That's sort of a natural part of things. And I think it's good to have more of that out in the open so women can see representation of themselves within the community. That's something that I've struggled with. So much of the grimoire community is male dominated, like almost all of it, frankly. And it's unfortunate because there is a lot of sort of dealing with the way that things are presented and being like, oh, I don't know if my experience is valid because it doesn't match up to this, like all of these different, experiences noted by various men, but I'm a woman. And I think it's silly of me to expect my experience to be exactly aligned with that of other, not only practitioners, but also practitioners of a potentially different gender. And especially if you're like non-binary as well, right? Or you don't align with either of the genders, like your experience will be different as well. And so I would love to see more of that in the community. And a lot of that is encouraging us as females to write more and to share these experiences. That's why, like, Ivy and Lynn, your book's coming out. It's great because people get to see these things from a different perspective than they are traditionally reported. And so I think that's also really important. But yeah, just also having these conversations. They're hard conversations to have, and they're conversations that can get you labeled as some not so great things. But like, this is how change happens in these communities, is by not letting these things sit in the shadows. And so I think it takes a lot of courage to bring them up. And it takes a lot of courage also to be people who lift those voices in order to effect a change. And so I think that's something we can all do sort of as a collective community to cause real change.
I also want to touch on that this is just misogyny in the space. This is not even racism in the space. So, being that this is a panel of white women, or I'm white, depending on who you talk to. This is a panel of white people, so it's like, this is just misogyny. So we're not even talking about people like women of color in these spaces and how they have been excluded just as women have, but then even further just because of racism. And so I think that would be another panel that I would love to have. So if anybody in the comments has any, favorite practitioners, regardless of what they practice, please list them and I will reach out to them and see if they would like to do a panel, because I think these are also, again, really important things, being that magic in general should be the most inclusive space ever. And it's not. And that's very strange. So, being able to have these conversations publicly, and the fact that people are listening to them and, wanting to make that change, I think that's really, really important in general. And also just, like holding other people accountable for doing any of the things that directly contribute to the misogyny and racism in these spaces. Like, not, if somebody's making a comment about anybody and that this is rooted in one of those two things or both, say something, like you don't have to be mean, but like make sure you're like, hey, that kind of sounded pretty sexist. Like, are you just saying that because she's a woman? Are you just saying that because, she is brown? Like, why did you say that? And um, holding each other accountable, I think, is something that everybody needs to get better at, myself included. It's just something that we are taught, especially as women, is to smile and be nice and not to cause any problems. And, if you speak up, then you're being a bitch. And that's not the case. Like, at the end of the day, hold each other accountable. Make sure that you talk about how other people are treating you and how other people are treating other people, because I think that's super important. Yes, Astra, cause all the problems.
You can cut this out if you want to edit this out. But I just have to say, because on the comment of you saying this being a panel of white people, you are very valid in your mixed experience. And I have seen you get so bullied. This is completely irrelevant to the misogyny conversation. It's more so about just racist comments in general. You are valid in your mixed experience. You are not 100% white, okay? So I'm just saying that I know you feel like you have to say that because you're maybe white passing and people are like, oh, Olivia's a white girl. She doesn't really know anything. Hell no. Like, you are not fully white, okay? So I just want to put that out there. I'm so sick of that shit. So you can edit that out if you want, but I just
No,
had to
I
say
mean, I
that.
appreciate it. And I think that can be a conversation. I have a video, I think, talking about like my mixed experience a little bit like years ago. But yeah, like the mixed part is definitely interesting. And I think especially being that I'm very clearly like white presenting or white passing, that there's like that really weird dichotomy. And I would definitely make, I guess, a video about that because maybe people are interested in that. But that's funny that you even point out that you're like, I've seen you get bullied. And it's like, yeah, it's weird. But anyway, are there any closing thoughts on this topic of being a woman in male dominated spaces, any misogyny, like anything like that? Are there any closing thoughts that anybody has?
I just want to say that, like, if you're a woman in these spaces, you're not alone. And I think when I was able to have conversations with other women about the misogyny that we experience in these spaces, it like made me feel very much a part of a community. So just know that you're not alone and there are people you can talk to. And we're all here to support each other. And so, it sometimes feels very isolating, can sometimes feel very, very lonely, especially if you're even a solitary practitioner, like in the ceremonial space, and you don't have that community around you. You aren't alone. And I want that to be super clear.
Something to add. I just want to say thank you to all the male magicians that have been absolutely amazing to me. All the male chaos magicians that I've encountered. Like, if you are a man watching this panel, you've gotten this far. Like Lauren said, you're already part of the solution, because unfortunately, I think the people that are part of the problem are either not going to click on this video at all, or they're certainly not going to make it towards the end of the video. So if you did make it to the end of the video, thank you. And yeah, I think that was pretty much it. I just wanted to pay my respects because it's really not everybody. It's just a problem in the culture. So yeah.
I guess I'll go next here. And I wanted to say, first of all, thank you so much for having me on this panel. Thank you to everyone who came. What a fantastic time it was. I think this discussion will be tremendously useful for the community, men, women, all people of all genders. And I just wanted to extend the invitation. If you feel called to explore ceremonial magic, or within ceremonial magic Thelema, if you feel curious, the door's open for you. You absolutely belong here. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. And, a lot of my work has been focused on making it inclusive, making it accessible, opening that door for people in different ways. And not to just make this all about my upcoming book, but I want to say that book I wrote, it was a love letter to practitioners, and it was me opening another door, because my thought was, so many people come into Thelema and they say, hey, how can I get started? How can I get a taste of Thelema? And we all have throughout our lives celebrated holidays, birthdays. And so people first ask the question of, well, what holidays does Thelema have? How can I celebrate throughout the year? And I answered that question. So it's a way to engage with Thelema in a new, fresh way, for old practitioners, because they may have not been celebrating our seasonal cycle, which is spelled out in the Book of the Law, and for new folks, just sort of testing the waters. So welcome. I'd love to see you over at my channel and in my work, and wish everyone, all viewers and listeners, as well as everyone on this panel, the best of luck on your path, wherever that may take you.
Thank you so much for making this happen. I mean, it's been such a kind of treat to spend this time together with you all. I guess I want to say that probably what's important, like focus on who you meet on the path, not in the spaces. There's so many spaces. I talk about this space, that space. Like spaces are just spaces, but who you meet on the path is, other aspirants, other people wanting and journeying towards the same end that you're wanting and journeying towards. And if you focus on that, you're going to meet the kind of people in the kind of ways, the kind of places at the kind of times that can share with you what you need to know. So I love that Harper Feist was brought into the room. I wish she could be here with us. I love Harper. She's a dear friend of mine. And another name that I didn't hear mentioned that I wanted to speak about is the Jane Wolfe diaries. The 𝘺𝘺 diaries are the diaries of Jane Wolfe, who's one of Crowley's students at the Abbey of 𝘺𝘺 in Italy. Very clear instances there of a woman's experience with initiation. I think it isn't sort of spoken about enough how powerful what's written in those diaries is. Yeah, you know what I'm talking about, Astra. Yeah.
I did mention Jane Wolfe, but I'm really glad you brought up Jane Wolfe's
But
diaries.
the
I did not
diaries
mention. Yeah,
specifically,
yeah,
yeah,
Yeah.
because
specifically.
her role socially was not even the same as like, all right, this is her personal record. And everyone
Yeah.
looks at, oh, this is Frater Akkad's diary because like, it was published a long time ago. But like, anyway,
I'm so glad you
go
brought her
on.
up. You said it. I was like, yes.
And she gets really spicy in those diaries too. Like she
Yeah.
says stuff and I'm like, wow, that actually mirrors my experience. So it's a good
Some,
read.
Sometimes it's easier to publish something that someone wrote while they were alive after they're deceased, because to share your own personal experiences of that level of intimacy, a lot of times it doesn't work while you're still alive. Just saying.
Astra, do you have anything to add?
Oh no, I just feel like I
Oh,
said my
okay.
piece, so I'm good.
Okay, perfect. No, 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 you're good. Well, all right, sweet. I mean, yeah, I really appreciate all of you taking the time out of your day and coming out to be on this panel and chat with me and like open up about your experiences and just kind of like your practices and all of that. So I'm hoping that we can definitely continue this conversation some other time, maybe deeper in just your practices and less about the the problems that you face due to being in a male dominated field. But yeah, thank you again, everybody. I will leave all of the links to everybody down below, as well as that lecture that Lynn Mavis put out that we talked about earlier. And yeah, all the links, all the books, everything will be linked down below. But yeah, so thank you, everybody. And I will talk to you all next time. Bye.